What if scenarios are a hallmark of pretty much any form of media. You see it a lot in NASCAR. You've seen it all over the place with Marvel and other things like that. It's just something that we always think of. What could have happened? So, I posed that question to all of you. I said, in your opinions, what are the greatest NASCAR what-if scenarios or timelines ever? And I gotta say, your guys' responses were really good. Sure, there were a lot of them that were the same, but at the same time, they're really good ones. So today, we're gonna look at some of your comments and sort of explore these different scenarios. Starting off, we have Sly Supersonic, who says, as a diehard Joe Gibbs racing fan, what if Chevrolet cared more about JGR and didn't let Toyota steal them away? Chevrolet's dominance in NASCAR would go uninterrupted throughout the 2010s. We all know what JGR was able to do with Toyota between 2015 and 2019. Those 5 years could have easily gone to Chevrolet if they didn't piss off Joe a decade prior. Well, I think yes and no. If Chevrolet put more resources into JGR and kind of put them up at the same level as Hendrick Motorsports, I think this could have happened. You saw what happened with Tony Stewart in 2005, and I think it could have been replicated. But I do think that had they stayed with them, Toyota would have got someone good anyway, so I think it would have been the same, just with different characters. Next up's from Groovy Goose, who says, okay, taking a shot in the dark here. What if Adam Petty didn't pass away so soon? Could he have saved Petty Motorsports and returned it to its glory days? Also, how would have that affected other drivers' careers as a result of Adam Petty being there? Perhaps Almirola never gets his shot in the 43 for all those years. Well, I think this is something that's kind of a misconception, that Adam Petty was going to resurrect Petty Enterprises and bring it to the level that the King had it in the 60s and 70s. While I think that Adam Petty probably did have some good amount of talent, there was nothing really showing that he was going to set the world on fire. If anything, he probably would have peaked out around where his father Kyle Petty did. But I don't see the 43 after having decades upon decades of being subpar, just resurrecting because one guy was in the frame. There was a lot of things that were old school about Petty Enterprises that were the reason for them having to merge with Bray Evernham. Joshua Boston says, here's a thought. What if Red Bull wasn't forced out of the sport because of Infiniti and Nissan? Well, here's the thing about Red Bull. From all accounts, it sounded like they were losing money on NASCAR, and they were kind of painted into a corner. Their franchise driver, Brian Vickers, was becoming a joke, and they probably would have had to let him go anyway. And Casey Kane, their other driver, was leaving for Hendrick Motorsports after 2011. Could they have gotten some other drivers in free agency? Yes, they could have. Maybe they plugged in Mark Martin here and there. Maybe they plugged in Austin Dillon or something. But I really don't think that Red Bull would have been that competitive long term. And I think they would have been another one of those Toyota teams that had fallen off in the 2010s. Mr. D-Man 952000 says, what if Brian France wasn't appointed CEO and didn't turn NASCAR, quote, from the number one motorsport in the US to WWE on wheels in just 15 years? It still is by viewership the most watched motorsport, but I get what you're saying. The thing about NASCAR is that I think it always would have ended out this way. It was trending this way anyway. For instance, NASCAR was talking about splitting the Cup Series into different conferences that would meet at certain points of the year to try and be more like football. There also was playoff talks well into the mid and late 90s, so I think that would have happened eventually as well. Brian France just was the coked up version of this that was going to take it at full speed. I think if we didn't have Brian France, we'd have the same things just at a slower pace. Andrew Meyer says, what if Mark Martin won one championship? How would it have affected driver legacies? Dale could have been a 6-time champion, or Gordon's most dominant stretch could have been interrupted, or Stewart could have been a 2-time champ, or Jimmy doesn't reach 5 in a row. I think that's amazing to think about. If Mark Martin gets the job done in one of those years that he came up second, somebody's legacy is changed forever. If Dale has 6 championships, he's probably not put in the same conversation by many old-time fans as the King. If Gordon's most dominant stretch is interrupted, then we're talking about him more at a DW level, whereas people nowadays really put him in the GOAT conversation. If you look at Stewart only having 2 championships, well, he's right down there with like Terry Labonte, who isn't a bad driver, but I think Stewart overall has shown to have been better. Or Jimmy doesn't reach 5 in a row. Well, he reached 3 in a row, but he'd always be tied with Cale Yarborough. That streak would never be broken probably with the new playoffs, so it's something that would stand forever. It's amazing the butterfly effects that just one driver can have. Arceus Bowser 212 says, what if Dale Jr. never got any of the concussions he received from crashes? Would he have won a championship? Well, I think you have to look at how he was performing before some of his major concussions. For instance, in 2002, he had started out the season slow, but was a championship contender in a very winnable year for him. So if he doesn't get that concussion, I don't see him falling in the points like he did or making some of the dumb mistakes he did. I see him actually competing for a championship. Then you look at 2003. He was, about 200 points out for most of the year behind Matt Kenseth. But after his concussion, I think that the year was pretty much over. I think he would have done better. 2012. He wasn't going to win the championship, but he was running at a very high level. And I think that if he hadn't been running at 80% throughout the first weeks of the chase, he very well may have competed for it. And then when he had his concussion in 2016, considered a down year at the time, he still had 3 or 4 second place finishes and was well within the chase grid. So, do I think he'd win a championship? Probably, but I'd have to explore it even more than I am right now. From Holy Shoot, It's a Talking Muffin, definitely all the ones revolving around Dale Earnhardt's death. What if he lived? What would Kevin Harvick's career had been like driving the AOL number 30 car? What would have been the fate of DEI, NASCAR in general, etc.? Well, I think I've covered this for the most part when it comes to how he would have performed. As for Kevin Harvick, I think he would have started his career better. I don't think he would have had a big downward turn in his second year because he would have been with his team. He talked about this a bit on the Dale Jr. download. The fate of DEI, I think it lasts a lot longer. Dale had a vision, and that vision was not fully realized by Teresa. NASCAR in general, I think would be a little higher than it is today, but that would be the butterfly effect of having Dale there in the early 2000s to keep stuff up the way that NASCAR, Fox Sports, and NBC Sports was planning. Beast Mode Brandon says, what if Dale Jr. doesn't get fined at Talladega in 2004, then doesn't make a bad block on Carl Edwards? A double on that, what if Jeff Burton never left the 99? All right, let's start with the Dale Jr. one first. Had he not been fined at Talladega, that's only 25 points. He lost the championship by 138 when he finished 5th. So he would have still been 113 out. Then you look at Atlanta. Well, let's say he doesn't make that bad block. He retains his position, finishes 3rd instead of 33rd. Well, that's 101 points, which means he would have still finished 12 points behind Kurt Busch at season's end. Agonizingly close for us Junior fans. He would have finished 3rd, though, right in front of Jeff Gordon, so that's, I guess, a consolation prize. But he would have raced differently, I think, in those final 2 or 3 weeks. So you could say he could have won it. He would have been right up there. I think that would have raced the end of the Homestead race a lot different. So you never know how it would have been. As for the one with Jeff Burton, well, I don't think you'd have that deal where he's up front because I don't think he would have ran as well as Carl Edwards did in that car at Atlanta. So there's a lot of ripple effects from that as well. Now let's move to a comment from Liam Buchanan who says, what if Sterling Marlin wasn't injured at Kansas in 2002? Well, I'm going to say it right now, he wouldn't have won the championship. He was already banged up, and we're only talking about the injury at Kansas. I think he would have finished in the top 5 in points. I think he would have done better than McMurray did for the most part in that car, but I still think he would have lost out to Stewart and Martin. Now, moving past that, I think he would have performed better from 2003 to 2005 and definitely would have been a top 20 to top 15 driver, chase caliber in those years as well. Look what Jamie McMurray did. So I wouldn't say that it would make his career all of a sudden a lot better, but I think he would have gotten a few more wins. I think he would have performed a lot better, and I think he would have been remembered better by fans. Now, Baked Bean Cup Series kind of keeps up on this trend, saying, what if Kyle Busch never had the accident at Daytona in 2015? How would tracks still be, and if concrete barriers would still be a thing? Well, I'm going to say, had he not had the accident or not gotten injured, he still would have done awesome in Cup. Toyota was very fast that year, and that doesn't change just because Kyle Busch was hurt. I do think that it would have legitimized his championship, though. As for track safety, I think it would have been a little slower, but at the trajectory it was at, it really didn't change too much. I think that wall might have been bare maybe a year or two more, but that's about it. Fourth Amendment says, easy one. What if Ford did not refuse to let Tony Stewart hire Larson? My guess is he probably would have still signed with Hendrick Motorsports anyway, knowing that he would have been less competitive at SHR. I think you hit the nail on the head right here. The thing is, with Ford, even if they would have let Stewart hire him, where is the sponsorship? If Stewart had it lined up, maybe SHR would have been the one, because I think people like Stewart and Larson can see eye to eye with each other. As for the Hendrick connection, Hendrick's willing to have HendrickCars.com. He's willing to even pay out of his own pocket, which is a different thing from HendrickCars.com. So I think he still would have signed with Hendrick, but I think the animosity between Tony Stewart and Ford wouldn't be there. So maybe the Dodge rumors wouldn't be there right now. Luca James, 35, then brings up, what if Davey Allison didn't die? He was arguably the best driver of the grid when he died. Well, I don't know about that, but what I do know is that he had plenty of time to continue getting better. You see, he was only 32 when he passed away, which, to put that in perspective, at the time, Mark Martin was 33, and he had plenty of great runs left in his career. So I think that Allison would have been one of the premier drivers. He would have challenged guys like Dale Earnhardt, Jeff Gordon, Mark Martin, Jimmy Johnson. He would have challenged probably up into the late 2000s. I mean, Mark Martin was still competitive into 2009 or so. I'm not saying that Davey Allison would have been, but I do think he would have been into 2005, 6, and 7, around that range. Hell, maybe he could have been competitive even into the early 2010s. We'll never know, but I do think he would have been one of the all-time great drivers, seeing how good of a start to a career he had already had. Now, the boss, 43, says Dale keeping it on the bottom line and Waltrip Jr. being pushed to win the 2001 Daytona 500, giving DEI and Earnhardt a 1-2-3 finish. I think that would have made the Daytona 500 in 2001 remembered as one of the top 3 races ever, on the same level as the 1992 Hooters 500 and the 2003 Carolina Dodge Dealers 400. If you go back and watch the first 199 3/4 laps of that race, it is seriously one of the best, if not the best race you will ever watch. Crashes are in there just fine. Great racing is in there. Storylines are in there. Everything came together to make the greatest race NASCAR had ever seen, with it being the first of the new contract. And on top of that, Michael Waltrip breaking a huge winless streak with Darrell in the booth in his first race, Dale Jr. pushing him, and then Dale Earnhardt in third, having the 3 DEI/Dale Earnhardt cars up there. It would have been the absolute perfect story. Brandon Settle brings up, what if Mark Martin won the 2007 Daytona 500? Would he have run the entire season after that? Well, let's talk about the 500. Had he won the 500, I think it would have been remembered as one of the best moments as well. I think it would have been more remembered than Harvick winning it, and I think that a lot of fans would go back to that finish fondly to watch one of the great fan favorites finally conquer a race that's gotten away from him over and over again. So, would he have run the whole schedule? No. Martin was pretty adamant that he wouldn't be running the whole schedule. At that point, I don't think he had realized that he wanted to go back to full-time driving again, so he would not have. But I do think that the pushes to get him there would have been a lot stronger had he had a win and was looking like a championship contender like he honestly could have been that year. The man in the black truck says, mostly though, what if David Pearson ran a full schedule? Well, I'm going to tell you this. The king would have had to share his throne. You see, in my opinion, and I think this is one that Richard Petty shares with me, I think David Pearson actually might have been a little bit better than the king. He was a driver who didn't run a full schedule, still won championships, won 105 races, and whenever he and the king went back and forth, their battles were legendary. I think had he run a full schedule, or many full schedules, that he would have been the one with the most wins in NASCAR history. I don't think Richard Petty would have had 200 by any means. I don't think Richard Petty would have had 7 championships. If anything, David Pearson would have been the one with 7 championships. I think he's one of the most underrated drivers, and if that what if would have played into full effect, everyone would have seen just how good the Silver Fox was. Papa Curly Davis 007 says, what if Ray Evernham had never left the 2014? Well, I'm going to say that I think the 24 team would have stayed at its 90s level well into the early 2000s. I think they would have won not just one more championship, but maybe 2 or 3. And I think that the battles between Jeff Gordon and Jimmy Johnson would have been absolutely legendary on so many different fronts. Because think about it. You have Gordon versus Johnson, master versus apprentice in 2007. But you also would have Ray Evernham versus Chad Knaus, arguably the 2 best crew chiefs to ever sit atop a pit box, dueling against each other for a championship or championships. Yes, Gordon went against Earnhardt for a championship, but if you think about it, Earnhardt always was switching different crew chiefs. The Johnson-Knaus duo, that one would have been a lasting one, just like the Gordon-Evernham one would have been. So, if you have that, I think you have some of the fiercest championship fights, no matter the format, ever. And I think it'd been something that would have been one of the greatest things fans could look back in NASCAR history at. Justin Please says, what if Danica Patrick stayed in Xfinity for a couple more years? I think she would have been actually very competitive and won some Xfinity races. People forget that she was showing a ton of improvement in that time, and her and Tony Eury Jr., for whatever reason, were starting to click and get on the same page. I'm not saying she would have won a championship. I'm not even saying she would have been a championship contender, but I think she would have been a solid top 10 driver week in and week out. And I think that had she gotten the time to develop her skills in a stock car and not be thrown directly into the wolves with the Cup guys in 2013 and 2012, I think that she would have actually been a top 20 Cup driver. I mean, many forget that in 2015, early in the year, she was up in the playoff grid. And it wasn't like it was, the first 2 or 3 races. It was like 9, 10, 11 races in. She was running in the top 5 at different times at Kansas and Atlanta. So she was definitely getting a hold of things. But because of the steep learning curve and her being thrown to the deep end of the pool with all these changes and everything going on, she really didn't stand a chance. I think she could have actually made the playoffs off of points one of those years, and I think she would have been remembered a little more fondly, but still as someone who disappointed because of the media's high hopes for her. Now let's finish off on one more fun one from Thomas Sylvie. What if Fox and NBC did not get the NASCAR TV rights in 2001? Would it still be ESPN, TBS for the Coke 600, ABC for some races, and CBS for the Daytona 500 and some more races as well? Well, I don't know if it'd be that exactly, but I think that not having centralized networks that can be really consistent, not just for your fans, but for potential new fans, it would have really hurt the sport. I don't think NASCAR would ever have gotten to the levels it did in the early 2000s. I think it would have peaked out probably where they were in about 2014 or 15 after they've fallen off a bit, but were still above 90s level ratings. You see, the Fox and NBC deal was one of the most important things to ever happen in NASCAR because, one, it put them on a very consistent basis on TV, but 2, it also put them on the premier broadcasters for sports. Fox and NBC have really always been some of the best. CBS has always been good. ESPN has fallen off over time, but was good. But these ones were networks that were absolutely perfectly served for NASCAR, and it showed. So I think had that deal not been signed, NASCAR probably would have never gotten to so many people that it did and still is. Now, heading out, I want to say thank you to everyone for leaving so many great comments, whether they were in the video or not. So to follow that up, leave some more down in the comment section below. We can really talk about what we talked about here or ones that weren't even brought up. While you're at it, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more great NASCAR content. To all of those who are supporting my channel and the channel memberships, thank you so much for that support. It means the world. So until next time, have a good one.